Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
What the does that mean? What the is he talking about?
Blade is badass. Nothing else needs to be said. That's the whole video. Bye. On the list of comic book movies that were really good from the 90s and early 2000s, you'll find the Wesley Snipes Blade movies. The first released in 1998 and was so successful it actually saved the company. Basically, Marvel wasn't doing so well and most of their adaptations were flops, causing them to lose money. But Blade broke that dry spell and is considered to be their first hit in terms of movie adaptations. It was successful both financially and critically, and helped save the company from bankruptcy. We really should be putting some respect on his name. The first two are considered some really solid movies and really stand above other comic book adaptations at the time. The third one was kind of a dud, but there's no denying that these movies are badass, and drew a lot of positive attention to the character and Marvel in general. It showed audiences and studios that comic book movies can be popular and profitable. And hell, without it we might have never gotten the other Marvel adaptations that came after. And I figured since it's spooky season, it's only fitting that I talk about the vampire slaying badass, Blade.
Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind?
So Blade was directed by Stephen Norrington, and written by David S. Goyer, the same Goyer who would work on the Dark Knight Trilogy, BVS, and Man of Steel. Prior to this, the director mainly worked on special effects and makeup crews, on films like Aliens and Alien 3, and didn't direct many films. Blade was his second movie, and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was his last. Quite the resume there. But on the short list of movies that he directed, he has at least one banger, Blade. Now this movie is pretty good, and I love how it mixes martial arts, gunfights, and horror, but it definitely feels like a product of its time, mainly with the music and the editing. Like the scenes where they fast forward everything and lights become blurry. It was a popular thing to do back then, and just like every other summer blockbuster at that time, it has some spotty CGI. It varies from looking pretty decent to looking like ass. The story and writing aren't really the best either, but it has such charm and a level of ridiculousness to it that I can't help but enjoy it. And the things that it does well makes up for its shortcomings. So before I get into the issues I have, I want to talk about the things I liked. Okay, so each Blade movie has an intro fight scene that shows you Blade being a killing machine, and out of all of them, this one has the best one. It's at a techno rave party in the back of a meatpacking plant, where blood is spraying all over the crowd, and as the vampires swarm the one human, they all stop as they see Blade, and his reveal is slow and dramatic, and right off the rip he just starts laying them out. This whole fight sequence is brilliant. It's a good first impression. You get some shooting, swordplay, hand to hand, and it's all in bloody fashion. This is just a taste of what you're in for. Really, most of the fight scenes and shootouts are great, although some have some pretty silly and dumb moments, but they're all at least entertaining, you can't deny that. So the action is bloody, creative, and funny at times, either intentionally or unintentionally. What I think makes everything work so well is Wesley Snipes. His stone-cold delivery and demeanor really helps sell it all, especially the cheesy and goofy lines and moments, and there are quite a bit. The dialogue might not be the best, but they're delivered so seriously by Snipes that it just works. Seeing such a serious character do stuff like this just makes it hard not to like him. Not to mention, some of the one-liners are great, and like I've already mentioned several times, he's an effective vampire-killing badass, and it's awesome just watching him dispatch of them in a variety of different ways. I also like that we don't really know much about Blade until like an hour in. They kind of keep him as this mysterious character for most of the runtime. The movie drops some hints early on that makes more sense later, but for the most part we only know that he kills vampires. Then when we're finally given some information about his background, in the context of the movie and the situation, it makes sense to why Karen is being told this, so it doesn't feel like an out of place or random exposition dump. Speaking of Karen, I really like her. She's actually pretty useful and isn't just a damsel in distress. She comes up with a cure to vampirism for those who've been bitten, and she can make a serum for Blade to help him. And she comes up with a new way to kill vampires by blowing them up by using this chemical. She's smart and resourceful. Hell, when Frost and Quinn throw her to her zombified ex-boyfriend, she quickly gets out of the situation. But my favorite thing about her is her relationship with Blade. She's not a love interest. They form a bond throughout the movie, but it's a friendship or a partner relationship, and not a romantic one. It's a nice change up from your typical comic book movie trope, where the hero must have a love interest of some kind, especially back when it's first released. Hell, it's only recently that some comic book movies are moving away from that. Oh, another side character that's great is Whistler. He's really just a grouchy old man, but Chris Christopherson is great, and him and Wesley Snipes are good on screen together. There ain't much more to say, he's cool as hell.
Catch you fuckers at a bad time.
I like the world they set up here. They mention and show that vampires have their teeth in everything, from nightclubs to blood banks to the police, and they have familiars everywhere. And we get a glimpse into their politics. I do wish they dived more into that and how they operate a bit more, but hey, that's what sequels are for, I guess. But they set it up well enough here that I find it interesting, and it's cool seeing that vampires are literally everywhere in this world. Now, style-wise, this movie is awesome. There's some great shots, and the action sequences are in some pretty cool settings. My favorite shots are Blade walking in this empty, dirty street, and the final shot in the snow in Moscow, but there are several cool moments and shots in between. And I really like the variety of locations that they visit. It just makes the city feel bigger when you go from a meat plant techno dance club, to penthouses, to packed city streets, to subway stations, to an ancient building. I just think it looks cool and I like the variety. The music is pretty great too. It's mostly this techno soundtrack that feels so much like the 90s, but it works so damn well. You mainly hear it during fight scenes and damn it's catchy. And that's the main stuff I liked in Blade. It's got some pretty good and likable characters, a dope-ass soundtrack, and a badass lead with some very entertaining action. Now onto the stuff that wasn't so great. I already mentioned that the CGI isn't the best, but it's also from the 90s, so I won't be too hard on it. But yes, the CGI either looked pretty decent or like shit. But I want to talk about the things that actually annoy me in this movie. The main threats are the vampires, clearly. But the main bad guy is Deacon Frost, and I really don't find him that interesting of an antagonist. He's alright and has a few decent moments, but overall I don't find him that entertaining. And I found his plan of fulfilling this ancient prophecy to bring forth this vampire god interesting at first, but ultimately pretty disappointing during the climax. You think it's going to bring an actual god into the world, but it actually just makes him a bit stronger. It's kind of disappointing, and I found this whole prophecy kind of lost steam towards the end. The ending fight was pretty decent and fun though. Another thing I don't get with Deacon is that he causes trouble for the rest of the Vampire Council, and they clearly don't like him, and he's the only non-pureblood at the table. My question is, why is he there? He's not a pureblood like the rest of them, and clearly they have issues with each other, and he actively goes against what they say, and he just does his own thing. So why wouldn't they just get rid of him? Hell, how did he get in this position of power in the first place? These are questions that I kept asking in my head every time he was arguing with the Vampire Council, and the movie doesn't answer any of them, or even give a reason for why they don't just kill his ass. Just thought that was a bit annoying. Also, the movie drags in a few spots, but mainly towards the end. There's nearly a 20-minute section where not much happens besides people standing around and talking. It's near the end of the movie, and it's when they're getting the prophecy ready, and it's really just kind of boring. And I found myself just impatiently waiting for Blade to get free and kill everyone. This part is really a slog to get through. And that's about it. I really like Blade. It's also pretty cheesy at times, but damn it, I don't care. It's so damn fun, and Snipes delivers these lines so well that it just works for me. I think it's all part of the charm that this movie has. I recommend people to check it out if you want some fun, bloody action with a stone cold one-liner dropping badass.
Can you blush?
Here we go, Poppy.
The fuck you say to me?
After most successful movies comes a sequel, and I would argue that it's actually better than the first. Blade 2 was released in 2002 with David S. Goyer as the writer again, but in the driver's seat this time was Guillermo del Toro. This was one of his earlier movies, but I liked how even this early in his career you can see some things that he would do later on, like putting a creative twist on things you've seen before. In this case, it's vampires. And there are some great practical effects here too. And of course, Ron Perlman is here. I think it's cool going back to a director's early works and seeing early stages of stuff that they would do later on. It was released 4 years after the first in 2002. It received positive reviews and a decent box office. Now for me personally, I actually prefer this one over the first, and let me explain why. For starters, I find the story this time around much more interesting, and I like how they expanded the lore and the world of the vampires that was set up in the first. So the gist of it is this. There's a new strain of vampirism that has evolved in these vampires that now lets it feed on other vampires as well as humans. On top of that, silver and garlic don't affect them, and their heart is completely protected in their chest, making driving a stake through it very difficult. They're only weak to UV and sunlight, and they have a more intense thirst having to feed daily. But the cherry on top is their look and the way they feed. They look so damn grotesque and awesome. But anyway, these bad boys are feeding on humans and vampires, and they're multiplying fast. So the vampires reach out to Blade and team up to stop this new strain of vampirism before it spreads and wipes them both out. It's a very simple setup, and I find it far more interesting than the prophecy from the first. I like that they have to team up to fight a bigger threat, but still don't trust each other. Something that's carried over from the previous is the charm, although it is less cheesy this time around. But it still has its moments, and it puts a smile on my face. Same with the dialogue. It's much better here, and instead of being funny because of the goofiness or cheesiness, it's because they have actual jokes and funny moments that are supposed to make you laugh. And I think for the most part it all lands. And the action is just as fun as before, although not as bloody, but it's still very solid. Again, you get a mix of martial arts, swordplay, and gunfights. Also, I really like the practical effects and makeup. They're mainly used on these new vampires, and they look good. I especially love this scene where they're dissecting one of them, and you get to see their organs. It's gross, but awesome. And of course, there are some badass shots and scenery throughout, and some of these really do feel like Del Toro, like the head vampire's old decor in his chambers. It's very Del Toro, and I love the look. Also, this soundtrack is awesome. You got some good ass songs and artists here. You got stuff from Mos Def, Ice Cube, Cypress Hill, Jadakiss, Gorillaz and Redman, Busta Rhymes. This is a stacked soundtrack and I love it. Just about everything feels more polished this time around. But it's not to say it's perfect. There are a few things that I'm not a big fan of, but it doesn't ruin the movie for me. The first and probably the biggest is the CGI. It looks better here than it did before, but it's still not that great, and I feel like they rely on it too much. It feels the most noticeable and out of place during the fight scenes. There are several times that it'll cut from actual actors to the CGI models, and it's very noticeable. I don't know why they would switch to the CGI in some of these shots when a stuntman could do it and make it look more convincing. I'm not saying it looks terrible, but it is weird watching a fight scene, and it keeps switching between a CGI model and an actual stuntman. Although the CGI on the new vampires does look good. Also, there's this romantic subplot between Blade and this vampire chick, and I didn't think it really worked that well. And finally, this is more of a nitpick, but there are several times where large chunks of time will just pass from scene to scene, and you just don't really notice it. Like in the beginning, there's a scene where Blade locks Whistler up to see if he gets cured overnight from his vampirism. So Blade locks him away, goes upstairs, and has a flashback to Whistler's death. And then after like 10 seconds, it's the next morning. And again later on, they lock up one of the new vampires to wait for it to starve to death. They close the door, then it immediately cuts to them doing the autopsy. It's a very small thing I know, but I find it weird because they do it several times throughout the movie. Just some very strange editing choices. So overall, I found Blade 2 to be a very solid sequel, and I like it more than the first. I love the direction they went with introducing a new type of vampire. The story is much more interesting, and I felt that it didn't lose steam, and it kept me interested throughout. Although I can understand if someone likes the first one more, but regardless, it's a great follow-up to the first, and it's a blast. If you like the first one, I think you'll like this one as well, because it's a good continuation. I thought it expanded upon the world in a very interesting way. And even though it's almost the same length as the first, I found this one better paced and more engaging, so it doesn't drag as much. So Blade 2 is easily my favorite out of the trilogy.
Hey, dickface, you seen my dog?
Why are you gay?
Blade Trinity, written and directed by David S. Goyer, who wrote the first 2 Blade movies. So the premise sounds really interesting. Basically, a group of vampires resurrect Dracula in an effort to stop Blade and to become daywalkers themselves. So Blade teams up with a new group of vampire hunters to stop Dracula. So Blade versus Dracula sounds badass, right? Except the execution is poorly handled. And it's a shame because it's a very cool idea. There's so much wrong with this movie, let me just run through the things that I do like before getting into its problems. And that's the good things. Now onto the shit. So the biggest problem here is that it's more of what we've seen before, but it doesn't really push the envelope. If anything, it feels scaled down. Most of the fight and action scenes feel weaker in comparison to the other two, and not as interesting or creative. It has some moments that are pretty cool, but overall it feels lackluster. And everything feels cheaper. The costumes look cheap, the location and sets aren't nearly as interesting as before, and the film itself looks like a TV movie. The aesthetic of the first 2 were dirty looking. Here everything looks so clean, like a simple movie set. It's a different look visually from the previous 2, and one that I don't really like. Sometimes it feels like a CW show set. So visually it's a very bland and boring looking movie. Now the humor here is annoying. The first 2 had humor as well, but here I swear nearly every scene has Ryan Reynolds spewing some jokes and most of them just don't land. After a while it becomes really annoying. I like Ryan Reynolds, I do, and I'm not mad at him because I know he didn't write the movie. But there's an overabundance of jokes here, and they start to become, dare I say it, cringe. On a side note, I think it's kind of crazy that this was the first in a trilogy of bad comic book movies for Ryan Reynolds. It's like the guy was cursed for a while. Anyway, the writing lacks any charm and feels very boring. There's not even any cheesiness to it, which I would have accepted because that would have been more enjoyable than what we got. And it doesn't even hit the it's so bad it's good territory. It's not goofy, weird, or awkward enough for that. It's very bland, boring, generic, so it comes off as just plain bad. The only character that was enjoyable was Blade, and that's because Wesley Snipes is always entertaining. The main cast of characters all just seem very meh. I imagine they're decent enough actors. Hell, I really like Ryan Reynolds, but it just seems like they don't have that much material to work with, and there's like no chemistry between them. They all just feel very hollow, and the same goes for the villains here. The group of baddies here are far less interesting than the vampires from the last 2 movies, and they kind of come off as jokes. Hell, this chick looks like she doesn't even want to be there. And as for Dracula himself, or Drake as they call him here, he's boring as hell, and the final battle was disappointing. He's honestly the biggest letdown of the whole movie. I mean, the idea and premise was cool, but within 30 to 40 minutes, the movie started to lose me, and I just got less and less interested as it continued. So overall, I think this movie felt like a step backwards, and was a huge drop in quality from the previous 2. The action was less creative and not as interesting. The characters were pretty boring and didn't have much of a personality, and no chemistry with each other. And overall, this movie felt like things you kinda saw before, but not done nearly as well. And I'm also disappointed by the lack of blood and gore. Like, the movie's rated R, there's lots of swearing, but they dialed it back even further than the second one did. So the reception was pretty negative, and this was the last we saw of Blade in theaters. I remember there was a TV series, but I never watched it. But the character is coming back to be part of the MCU, so I'm curious how that will go. But this was a pretty sad note to end on, and it's crazy that it's been 17 years since we've gotten a Blade movie. Considering how well received and loved the first 2 movies were, you figured they would have rebooted Blade years ago. And that's my thoughts on the Wesley Snipes Blade movies. And it's a near perfect trilogy. The first one was a great introduction to the character and the world, filled with some very fun, bloody action. The second then took into a new and interesting direction, while also delivering just as much fun and creative action as the first. And then the third just felt hollow, bland, and boring. Everything felt scaled down and safer. It was less interesting, less unique, and not that fun. And a while ago I asked you guys, what did you think of the Blade trilogy? And basically everyone said the exact same thing. The first 2 were very good and very fun, some even called them masterpieces, while the third one was disappointing and most people just refused to acknowledge it. And just for laughs, I went ahead and asked you guys which was the best out of the trilogy. And the first one won by a large margin, which actually surprised me because I thought 1 and 2 would be closer. What I want to know is who voted for Trinity? Which one did it? Who's lying? So now what I want you to do is go ahead and leave your comments. Let me know what you think about the Wesley Snipes Blade movies. And let me know which one was your favorite. And if you enjoyed the video, go and drop a like on it. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.
Let's go.
Negus,
Niggas!
What is the definition?
a king.